Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is Church360 Members and the topic is entering offerings. My name is Peter Frank and I will be leading this discussion today. This is the third in a series of 6 webinars, so you're probably already familiar with me, but if not, I am the Senior Manager of Marketing Technology here at Concordia Publishing House, and part of that is our team, Concordia Technology Solutions. My email address is on the screen. You're welcome to reach out to me with any questions, although I will warn you, this week has been a busy week. I've had a number of webinars, both on Church360 Members, on church communications, and my inbox is a little backed up right now. So I hope to spend some time getting out of, as one of my colleagues, Stephen, calls it, email jail, when you kind of get overwhelmed with emails. So if you're waiting to hear back from me, I apologize, but I will be getting back to you soon. All right. Like I mentioned, this is a series of 6 training sessions. On Monday, we covered basic contact management. Yesterday, we covered building out person profiles. Today is entering offerings, and tomorrow we're going to get into year-end financial management. Now, I want to clarify, we are going to be talking about offerings this entire time as we look at finances, but today is about getting information into the system, and tomorrow are more of those year-long tasks, as we look at things like offering envelopes or pledges. Then next week, we're going to shift gears, go to events and attendance entry, and then finally on the last day, it'll be building reports. So like I mentioned, we've already got 2 down. This is the 3rd one in this series. A few housekeeping items before we go too far. First off, I am planning 75 minutes for presentation. I am notorious for going past my planned presentation time, but today I might actually have a shot of making it. We don't have that much to cover, so I'm going to do a deep dive in some of these things, hopefully answer all of your questions with the presentation. But if I don't, then we'll have some time at the end for questions. I'm planning about 15 minutes. We'll see how it goes. I'm always happy to stay longer if needed. The recording for this will be shared. I promise you that. You should get an email from me later today. Regardless, it's going to go into our resource center. I've had some people not get emails and find out that it was in their spam folders, or they had unsubscribed for our emails, so we couldn't send it to them. But you can always view it in the resource center, usually within 24 hours, sometimes a little bit longer. All attendees are muted. That's a question we get quite a bit. Why can't you hear me ask my questions? That's because we have a lot of people in our room today. We're almost in triple digits. Can you imagine if everybody had their mics available for talking? I would never get through my presentation. So we have everybody muted, but if you'd like to ask a question, you can put it into the chat. And I see several of you have already done that, so that's excellent. So that's that last one. Ask questions throughout. Because you're not asking to me verbally, you're typing it into the chat, go ahead and ask those questions as you're thinking about it. While that topic is on the screen, put it in there. I may not answer your question live while we're on that discussion, but that's why we have the question and answer time later on. That way it allows you to get it out of your head and into the chat, into that queue, and you can focus on the other things, knowing that it's going to be answered. Now, thankfully, I have one of my associates on the line, or at least on the chat. Tim from our support team will be helping answer those questions throughout. So pay attention to your questions. You may get that answer in the chat before I ever get to it in the Q&A time. All right, here is my assumptions screen. You're getting used to this if you've been attending in the webinars. They're pretty basic assumptions, but I like to clarify this, especially for people who are watching recordings, because you may not be going through these webinars in sequential order. So I assume that you are a brand new user of Church360 Members. That doesn't mean that experienced users are going to be bored during this webinar. I'm going to cover a lot of different details, but I'm going to start at the basics and work my way up. So in the first few minutes, if you're like, Peter, I know this, well, that's because I'm assuming everybody's at ground zero and we're going to work our way to the top. I'm also assuming that you have full access to the software, that administrator role. I know many of you don't have that. That's just the nature of it. But I can't plan for all the different variations of roles. So I'm going to plan for having full access. And if you see something that you need access to that I'm presenting on and you don't see on your screen, well, talk with your administrator. Maybe it's time to get you access to that. Finally, I'm also assuming that you've attended the first 2 sessions of this training webinar. And I should have put the word first in there on the screen. Because I've already presented on some topics, I'm not going to go into them in great detail. I may review a little bit, not so much today. This topic is pretty much brand new, but I'm not going to necessarily go back and start at ground zero from everything. We're just going to be focused on offerings today. So those are my assumptions. Next, I'm going to ask you to tell me a little bit about yourself, just so I know who's here. This is a way to make sure you're awake. I know it's not too early in the morning, and for those of you on the East Coast, it's getting close to the afternoon. But my first question here is, please select the option that most closely describes your primary role at church. Now, I'm curious to see how much this changes because of the topic at hand. And I should say, if you can't answer the question, there's probably some kind of conflict between what's going on in your computer and the webinar software we use. We've had some issues this week. So don't worry if you can't answer it. This is just to put my finger on the pulse of who's here. So it's not a big deal. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share this with you just so you can see. As you might have guessed, we still have a lot of administrator roles here. And we also have a lot of financial manager. That's pretty expected, because even in that administrator roles, especially for smaller churches that just don't have the benefit of lots of paid staff or even lots of volunteers, the offering entry comes into play quite a bit. But we don't have that many pastors here today, which also makes sense, because usually pastors don't get involved with the offerings unless you're the only one in the office. Or maybe you are doing this because you're the administrator of the software and you want to know how it works. All of that is great. And for those who are in that other role, I appreciate you being here too. All right. Well, I'm going to move forward. Normally I ask another question, but I've been asking that question quite a bit about if you're currently using the software. So I'm going to skip that today and get right into our training goal. By the end of today, you will know how to set up your funds and enter offerings for your congregation. And that may seem kind of simple. Again, this webinar doesn't have a really long agenda, which allows me to get into some nitty-gritty details. So this is what we're looking at today. First, we're going to get into funds. Funds is really simple. We're going to talk a little bit about strategy, how it ties into the chart accounts, but it's not going to take us too long because this is pretty straightforward. And honestly, this is really a one-time thing. Then we're going to get into offering entry, and we're going to explain how the process works, get into it step by step, talk about ways to make it more efficient, using your keyboard, using your mouse, all of that fun stuff. Then we're going to switch it up. And this one I'm kind of excited about. I don't think we've ever done this before. If we have, it's been a while. I'm going to log in under a different role so you can see what the permissions look like. There's so much privacy around offerings, and it's so critical to keep it private because it's a sensitive topic. So I want you to have the confidence that when you set up a role for somebody that limits their permissions, you can see exactly what they're seeing. So that's what we're going to look at. Then we're going to talk about the e-giving sync using Vanko Payment Solutions, our preferred partner. Now, I'll caution you, I use the staging environment. The staging environment is a test system where it's kind of like our playground. It's not real transactions, and I just found out late yesterday that the staging environment has some issues. And so I'm not able to show everything in its entirety, but I'll be able to show most of it. The production environment, which all of our customers are using, that's totally fine. That's why I call it the playground, because sometimes as they're testing new features, either on Vanko's side or on the Church360 side, it breaks it on our end, but that's why you have a staging environment, so you can fix it before it goes to production. So just a word of caution on that. And then finally, we'll spend a little bit of time on basic reporting. I have a whole session on reporting, so I don't want to get into this too much, but I'm sure a lot of the earlier topics will lead to questions related to reporting. And so I'll take advantage of the extra time and talk about that just a little bit. As always, if you are not currently using Church360 Members and you want to follow along, go ahead and start your free trial at 360members.com. Well, let's go ahead and log in software. All right, I'm going to switch it over here. Make sure my screen is live. Thank you to those of you who are already asking some questions. We'll see how many of those I can get into. Whoops, I clicked on my PowerPoint again. As a reminder, my screen is zoomed in. It's gonna be tough to show everything, especially if your screen has a smaller version of my screen. But as just a helpful tip, I use the browser zoom to zoom in. So this is what it would look like at 100%. I have a very large monitor. If I zoom in by hitting Control and the plus button, I can get into 125%. I can even go farther if I want, but I think that I'm gonna stick at 125% for right now. If you have trouble seeing it, let me know. If you can't zoom in anymore and I get enough, I can try to zoom in even farther. So today we're going to talk first off about funds. So funds are the purposes for which your offerings are being given. To get the funds, you go up to the top right corner and you click on the settings button, this gear icon. When you click on that, then you'll go down to the fourth option down there, which is funds. Now this is a little bit tucked away. It's hidden in the navigation because you don't really go here too often. Typically, what I see is that churches have a good idea of what their funds are, and they set them up to start. And the only time that they ever go back in here to update it or to add a fund is if there's a special purpose that's going on. If you have a building project or a mission trip, some kind of event, that's when you would go into funds. All right. Had a couple questions about the Zoom already, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, especially because I see I have a lot of white space. So once again, on your keyboard, when you're in Church360 Members, you would hit Control and the plus button, which is on your 10 key on the far right-hand side, or maybe next to your backspace. Then you'd have to hit Control Shift and the plus. But I'll get into a little bit more because at least with this view, I've got a lot of white space, and hopefully you can see it a little more. All right, so I have imported my funds when I brought in my data. That is something that many of you will do as well. Maybe not personally, but if you have a data conversion or you come over from Shepherd staff, your funds will already be in place. And so you may never have visited this screen because it was set up to begin. But I'll walk you through the interface. On the left-hand side, underneath the title of funds, you have the entry option. And so you have a fund name and a number and a color. Well, the name is pretty straightforward. This fund name is the purpose for which those offerings are given. And it's going to be critical that you have all of your funds set up because not everybody who enters offerings can manage funds. And so it can be a little confusing if they go to enter in the funds and it's not there. They have to pause, wait for you to add it. It doesn't take long to add it, but you want to think through this. Now, we know that people will give offerings for all sorts of different purposes, and you may not have a fund set up for that. And so it's a good practice to have a plan for how to handle those. Your church may say, well, these are the funds that you can donate to. If you are giving it to something else, well, we can't either guarantee that it's going to be used for that purpose, or we may ask you about it. And so, for example, building funds. There's a general building fund at my church. We also have a capital improvements. The general building fund, or I guess I shouldn't say general, it's called building fund. It was actually for an addition that we have. And then we have a capital improvements fund, which is for our existing buildings that often have repairs needed. And so the building project completed about 14 years ago, we were still paying off the loans and everything. And so those were those two different funds. Now, if somebody said, well, I want to give this to your future building project, we don't have that right now. We don't have that planned. And so we would go to them and say, well, would you like it to go to the building fund or the capital improvements, or would you rather keep it? We don't have a place to save it or store it right now for future projects. So make sure your naming is clear on that. Now, the fund number is different than your account number in your bank. For example, if you have a savings account, you might deposit all of these into that savings account. So you're not going to want to put the bank account number. On your chart of accounts in your general ledger, you're going to have different account numbers, or you might. You don't have to within our ledger system, but you might have different account numbers. And those are usually 7, 8 digits, something like that. That's not what this is either. If you want to do that, let's say you want to show that specific number, and we'll just call this income account X, and then maybe you put in your fund number, and so it's 1-6 and a few extra numbers. If you want that to be included, I would put it under the fund name. And the reason for that is that the fund number in Church360 Members is all about ease of entry. That way, when you type in that number, you're assigning it to that fund. Now, this will make a little bit more sense later on as we get into the entry, but I want to clarify that up front because it is easily confused, and I don't really know how to describe it any better. We just put number there. If we put entry number, you might think, well, I have to do these first, and that's not the case either. Now, if you look down here, you can see we have almost all of ours set up except for general fund. Now, you can go ahead and click on one of these and add it in. So there's general fund as number 1. But let's say, what do we have here? We've got a number of different things. We've got a mission fund, but let's say we have a summer mission trip. That's the only thing. We'll say we're going to Mexico. I've been on about 12 mission trips to Mexico. It has a special place in my heart. So the summer mission trip to Mexico, as you look down here, you can see that we've got about 12 different funds. So I'm going to mark this as 13. And then I get the chance to put a color in. Now, the color really doesn't matter. It's just for identifying different funds visually. And if you don't want to have that visual identification, you can put them all to the same color. That's totally up to you. We have a palette of different options here. We'll go ahead and put this as red. That is totally up to you what you want to put it as. It's just a way to help distinguish them from that view. And then all I have to do is hit add fund. There it is. Now, when I refresh the view, it'll sort it and put it alphabetically, but it always puts it up at the top to start. All right, we'll give it a second to refresh. Yeah, there it is down there. Now, you saw me do it with the fund number here on general fund. When you click on a fund, you have the option to change the name. You have the option to change the number. You have the option to change the color if you want. Then you have this other one, exclude fund from contribution statements. What is that all about? Well, sometimes at churches, you have payments that are not donations, they're not offerings. They are payments for a good or service. Now, that seems like a business kind of thing, and it sort of is. But think about it in this way. If you are paying registration for Vacation Bible School, well, that is truly a transactional exchange. You're not donating it. If you have a required fee, you can't consider that just a donation. Maybe it's a suggested donation of $5, but it's not required. That's a little bit easier. But if you are registering for a trip, or like maybe the summer mission trip, if you as an attendee are paying for the flights, you as the church should not have to, or should not accept that as a charitable donation. Like that's starting to get on shaky or maybe just illegal grounds. So you don't want those showing up on the contribution statement because it's truly a payment. That's when you can go in here and say something like mission trip airlines fees, and we'll say 13, or we'll say 14, or maybe we'll just put in the very back, 99, because we don't really need it. All right, we'll add that, and then we'll click on here and say exclude from contribution statements. There we go, we'll save that. It'll identify that it's excluded. And because we don't want to like generalize everything and say, well, this was a payment, there might be things like fees or I don't know, I can't think of any good examples, but we wanted to keep it very general to say it's about the function, not necessarily what that is. We can't assume to know what that account is, but the function is it won't be shown on contribution statements. Lastly, what I want to show you is if you are deleting an account. I think I saw something about that. If I go over here and let's go to a different one. We'll go to church at large. If I hit the delete button and there's offerings for that, I can deactivate it, meaning it will not show up anymore on my list of available funds. But I can always add it back in by clicking that plus and saying restore. Whereas something like mission trip airline fees, if I click on it, I get a delete button. That's because there's been no gifts given, or in this case, transactions related to that. But to save the integrity of the data, we don't allow you to delete funds where there are associated amounts. So that's the difference between delete and deactivate. All right, before I go farther, let me see if there's any other questions here. Just because we're on the screen. Yeah, Paul already left. He said he's only seen Peter, not the presentation. I apologize for that, but it seems like other people can see the presentation, so I'm going to keep going. Cheryl has the question, how high can your numbering go? That's a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head. There we go. Well, we can at least go up that high. So that's good to know. So I don't think you're going to have more than 99,000 funds, but if you do, I am sorry. And then let's see, do deactivated funds show up on reports? We'll get into that next week. All right, how can I tell what the next fund number is? Christy's asking that. Well, we don't have a really good way of doing it. Typically, you would just look through here and see what's next. Some people will have different categories of numbers, and so there's not necessarily a next available number. We leave that open to you to figure out how you want to number it. So you don't have to go sequentially. If you wanted to, you can. But let's say here, like maybe we have the summer mission trip was 130. Maybe we'll call, or 13, maybe we'll call this 131. And that way we know it's kind of along the line, so I can start typing in mission or 13 for mission, and it'll show me my available numbers. All right, let's continue to move on. I'm gonna go into offerings next. So the offerings tab is really the center point of all things offering. That's why we put it up in that top navigation. So if you didn't see me, I went over to the left, clicked on offerings right up at the top. This view has a lot packed into it. There is a bunch of reporting that goes into this. There is different exporting that you can do. There's links to more reporting. Let me walk you through this screen. First, before I go too far, I've got a lot of flashing lights over here. If you remember, these are our beacons. These give you more information about your screen. And so this here says you've got the option for analyzing offerings. This here, compare, says you can go and look at different comparison reports. Up at the top, this is our message center for notifications. I'm going to just clear out of all those. Once you click on it, you read it, you dismiss it, you don't see them again, and that's okay because all of that information is available down here in our help center. All right, let's walk through this view. We've got offerings at the top here, that's our title. We've got new batch, we'll talk about that in a minute. And then you have a date range. This date range doesn't really do anything right now because I don't have any offerings shown. Well, that's because it's April 29th and it's saying April 29th through May 29th. Let's switch that up a little bit. Let's say April 1st through April 30th. Now I have a date range that has offerings in it because it's in the past. What you'll see is as soon as I change that date range, my chart here has been updated, as well as all of my different listings of offerings. Well, this chart, or this graph, I should say, it's not really a chart, it's a graph, is a visual indicator of your offerings by week for whatever time range you want, but it also is a date selector. We'll use this in a few other places, but this is the first time we've seen it during this training course. You'll see that as you hover over it, you've got that time frame, February 28th or 22nd through 28th, and the total amount. Then you have this selected range, which mirrors this date up here. But you have these little handles on the left-hand side, or paddles, depending on what you want to call it. And as you drag and drop them, you can expand your time frame, and it changes it up at the top. So if I drag backwards, I'll see even more offerings. So these work in tandem. The date picker is this here, and it's the same time frame as this. So if I brought this in and said December 31st, December 1st through, we'll say February 29th, my date selector has changed. Use which one you prefer. I personally prefer this because you can drag and drop anywhere on that chart. and you can see it. Now, what's also cool is that this kind of snaps to the edge of those weeks. And so if you want to see a specific time frame and you don't remember those exact dates, you can, and it's hard to show it visually, that sounds better, but it'll actually kind of drag and drop right at the beginning and end of those time frames. So it's very helpful. You also have the ability to have a dynamic date range, or maybe relative date range is a better way of saying that. You see here this today line. If I click on that and drag backwards, it'll say in the last 95 days. Now our date selector doesn't allow you to change that to last 95 days. It'll just go back to that date selector. But again, to do that, I go over here, I click on today and drag backwards. You can't drag forwards because you never have any details in the future. There's no such thing as future gifts that you have entered. So if you drag backwards, you can see that relative date range. This doesn't really help for our purposes today, but our reporting purposes on Tuesday of next week, it's very helpful. So I'll show that again on Tuesday, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of understanding of how this graph works. You also have your time range selectors on the left and right, which basically allow you to navigate across those dates. I'll show you one other thing. You'll notice that as I go back here, all of my bars get taller, but if I move to the right, everything drops down, even in that same kind of time frame. Well, that's because it's always trying to show you those trends. Remember, that was one of the things we talked about at the beginning. We bring data to light. And if you have a really tall or really good week, like we had around Christmas last year, well, that's going to make everything else look lower in comparison. But if I go outside of a Christmas time frame, well, I really want to see the differences by week. So it takes the maximum week and puts that at the top, and everything is relative to that week. So you might see that jumping as you go. Another thing, as you hover over the week, you probably have seen me doing it, it'll give you a total for that week. If I go over here, and start to just select a little bit of that, it'll snap to the edges. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. A lot of people still prefer to go here because it's comfortable, but I encourage you to give this a try. All right, enough on the graph. I just like playing around with it. On the right-hand side, you have some of our standard things. You have the ability to download this data in the chart to Excel or CSV file. You can go print it. The comparison takes you to a trend report. We'll look at that on Tuesday. Saving report is also going to be on Tuesday. And then here you have showing 174 offerings for everyone. If I go and do a different time frame, it increases the number. It's basically saying how many lines do you have here. This next one is the selection for your view. So it says offerings right now. That means every single line item. But maybe you don't want to see every single line item. That doesn't really matter. And for one thing, it's not really helpful. You look here, like Roger and Dorothy have a couple funds in there. Donald and Kimberly do. I don't know how many they gave total. Let's look at summary by funds though. This will take my funds that I've already listed out. We looked at that view. There's 12 of them that have gifts, and it'll list them out, but it'll list them for that time range in the last 62 days. Or I could do summaries by giver, and it'll look at all of the givers and list them out that way. We're going to stick with offerings for right now. We'll come back to that, but I wanted to highlight that for you just so you know what that was. This is a way of summarizing things. To the right of that is a way of filtering. This is our smart group selector. You've seen this before. This is not unfamiliar. In fact, it's the exact same smart group selectors as on the people view. This will allow you to narrow the list of offerings. So if you want to see offerings by members, you can do that. Now, it looks like everybody who gave an offering was a member, so that's not a great example. But we'll come back and look at this in a little bit more detail at the end, and we'll certainly get into that during the report section. For now, I want to focus on offering entry. We've already entered these in. In fact, we imported them in. I imported them in to prepare for these webinars. Let's show how that entry process works. We do everything within batches. That should be familiar to a lot of you. I know a lot of different software packages use batches, including Shepherd staff. So that is the entry method. We create a new batch so that everything is together. That mirrors what you do in the church office, or at least I'm assuming it does, because that's what I've heard from so many different churches. When you get offerings, typically on a weekend, you enter them all in as a batch at the same time. Now, you might do them as multiple batches, but you're usually doing them at the same time. I know at my church, we get offerings during the week. It's kind of a strange thing for me to think that people would rather drop their check off than put it in the offering basket, but I can understand why. And for some people, it's just their routine. They like to come down, say hi at the church office, hand the check in. That's fine too. You can do a batch of just one, but typically in church offices, there's a weekly batch. So the way you do it is you go up here and click New Batch. The first thing you do is you select a date. So if I go here, you'll see that it defaults to today. Now, if I go back to Sunday, I have that choice of entering an event. Entering an event doesn't really do too much other than change the title. Now I can see here I didn't title my events very well because I have two different events and I can't distinguish between them, worship and communion and worship and communion. So I'm not going to worry about that. You don't have to have an event. It just provides a label for your batch. I'm going to go no event for right now and we'll click add. I've now created a new event. And this is what you can see. It says no event right there. Now, if I change my mind, I can click edit, go here, select that event, and click save. Now I'm at worship and communion. So I should have thought of this when I created the events. We can name the events better when we get into that on Monday. But that's all it does, is it just provides that kind of label. Now there's some helpful information to this as you are looking at it. Maybe you want to divide it up by services, and it's going to make your entry easier. Here's the 8 o'clock service, here's the 10:30 service. I don't know, it depends on how you want to do it. Next, we get into the entry area. You'll see here that we've got what looks like a table. Typically, our entry is above the line. We have a black line in there. Often it's the smart group selector, and we'll have the entry above that. You saw that with funds before. Well, here we have it below the line because this is your entry line. And it's a really straightforward process. We spent a lot of time optimizing this. We visited several different churches in the area. We talked even more electronically. We collected all this feedback. It was fun to go and visit the churches and watch people enter offerings. This is what we have found to be the most efficient way. This is what our customers have found to be the most efficient way. You may do it differently, and that's okay too. Your way may even be more efficient, or it may just be that you're more comfortable with that. So it's all subjective, but this is what we have found to be the most efficient way to enter offerings. So the first thing you do is you select your offering or your name or envelope, offering envelope number. Stumbled over that entirely. The first thing you do is select the giver. The giver might be a name or an offering number. That sounds better. When you click on that, you can see that list. It defaults to loose offerings because we never know who the default person is, and we don't want to default to the first alphabetical name because they're not going to give any more frequently than somebody lower in the alphabet. But let's take a look here. As you scroll down, you'll see names and then sometimes numbers, but not always. In some cases, you will see individual names, and in other cases, you will see a married couple. In some cases, you'll see the married couple and an offering envelope number. That's pretty much what you would expect. Let's talk about how you find somebody. So like Barnes. We've been talking about Barnes for a while. This is our fictitious family that we entered in. When I type in Barnes, you'll see that I get Cameron and Matilda Barnes, the children, and you'll get Quinn and Nikki Barnes, the parents. And then you also have Susie Barnes, Nikki's mother. Although it just occurred to me now that Nikki's mother probably wouldn't have the same last name as Nikki when Nikki's married. I should have thought of that sooner. That's kind of silly of me. That's all right. So Quinn and Nikki Barnes are who we're talking about. When I click on Quinn and Nikki, it selects them as that giver, and then I can move forward with their gift. That's the key thing for contribution statements. That's important for pledges. You can't ignore that. If you know who gave, you should track it to who gave. Now, if you receive a gift from somebody that is not in there, that's a different story. So if, let's say my wife, Laura Frank, gave, I can't add that gift in. I have two options there. I can pause what I'm doing and it auto saves my place and go add Laura into the database. Or I can choose to say loose offerings. Now, if I say loose offerings and I want to keep going, I can always add a memo later on saying this is Laura. We'll look at that in just a few minutes. But you can't add somebody new from here. And I've had a lot of questions about that. Why can't you just add somebody new? Well, the reason is more back-end functionality. Because givers can be either joint or married, like joint givers who are married, or individuals, we can't automatically create somebody because there's just too much to find out. You'll see an attendance entry on Monday. You can actually add people from that view, but you're adding one person at a time. The fact that this is married couples makes it difficult for us to be able to program accordingly. So we haven't to prevent those confusing issues from coming up. We've selected Quinn and Nikki. Let's move forward. The next thing is payment types. There's 4 different payment type options that you have here. First, you have cash. Now, that's a little bit tricky when you think about it in terms of receiving cash for offerings and attributing it to a person. You won't often know that if they just throw cash into the plate. But this is for those circumstances where they have an offering envelope and they put cash in the envelope, and so you know it's them because of the envelope. Next, we have check. Check is very common, or at least it has been in the past. I don't think it's as common for younger people. I know that I don't like carrying a checkbook around. I rarely ever use checks. But if there is a check, you now have the option to enter a check number. This is not a required field. This is just for your reference and for the giver's reference when they get the contribution statement. If you don't want to enter a check number, you don't have to. I know a lot of churches don't. It's one more thing to enter, and it doesn't really provide enough value for them to spend the time entering it. So it's optional. Then you have electronic. That's the next one. You'll notice these little icons look like a cash icon, or they are a cash icon, a check icon, or a credit card icon. You can also see there's numbers showing up, 1, 2, 3. We'll talk about that in a minute. And if you hover over it, it tells you what they are, a little tool tip. I don't, maybe you can see it. It's a really small tool tip. You might be able to see something happening on the screen. The last one. Before I go too far, electronic. You can enter electronic offerings here. It is no different than cash, other than telling you that it's electronic. If you sync it with Vanko Payment Solutions, which we'll look at briefly today, if you sync it, it'll do that automatically. You don't have to enter them. It'll mark them as electronic. This is just if you're using a different system or if you haven't integrated Vanko yet. Again, we'll talk about that shortly. That's why you might use that. But for the most part, during entry, you're going to focus on 1 or 2. The last one on here shows a car. That's kind of a weird icon, but we couldn't think of another way to describe gifts in kind. And a lot of times, a gift in kind gift will be a car or some kind of vehicle. You know, we've got this old van, the youth group can use it. I'm going to donate this to the church for youth mission trips. Who knows what it is? This doesn't happen nearly as frequently as the other 3 types, but it happens far more frequently than I ever expected when I first started. It's not something I typically do, but there's a lot of people who do that. And when you think about it, it really ties back to Scripture, giving your first fruits to the Lord. Well, I know some situations are, in farming communities where the farmers will contribute some of the results of their crop to the church for various purposes. That's their livelihood. They could sell that and get money and then give money to the church, or they can cut out that middle step and give the food to the church. So that's just one example, but it is a very scriptural way of doing things. So that's what a gift in kind means. The challenge is figuring out the amount of the gift in kind. And that's a tricky question that I can't answer because there are so many variables to that. But I'll show you how we handle it in just a second. So you've got your payment type down, 1, 2, 3, 4, cash, check, electronic, gift in kind. The check number only comes into play for checks, and now we move into funds. And this is what we were talking about before, the funds. When you click on the drop down, you're going to see two groupings. You're going to see the most popular funds and then the other funds. This is based on the data in your system. The funds with the most dollars show up at the top because they're the ones that are used the most. But all of your funds are available for entry. Now, just like under givers, you also have a search. If I wanted to look for mission fund, or here, summer mission trip to Mexico, all I have to do is start typing in mission and it'll filter my list. I can also type in Mexico and it'll filter my list. I can also type in 13, the number, and it'll filter my list that way. That's where the fund number comes into play. So you can understand why you don't want real long numbers there. You don't want to put your account numbers or your chart of account numbers, anything like that. It's just for entry. I'll select summer mission trip, and then I get to enter the amount. If I type in any amount there, all of a sudden my screen will change. First, I see the amount there. Then I see that I get a second line. There's always going to be a second line after you've entered the first line, because if Quinn and Nikki wanted to split their gift among different funds, they can, and a lot of people do that. Then I also see that I've got numbers showing up on the lower right-hand corner in this grid. I see the type of offering, I see the fund, $100 in cash to summer mission trip, and then I get a total on both sides. I get it on the right, and the top row shows the total by type. That's very quick entry. It's easy to miss that. If I click 0 or if I clear it out, you'll notice everything goes back to the way it was before. If I click 100, there we are. Now, if I wanted to add a second fund, I don't have to type everything in again. Chances are Quinn and Nikki are not entering or are not putting cash and a check into their offering envelope. They're doing one or the other and describing how you want it to be split. So if it's two different payment types, you got to do two different lines. But if it's the same payment type, all you have to do is enter the next fund. So we'll go into building fund, $50. And again, I get another line. Now, this is just to make things easier for you to enter. It's not saying, well, tell them to give more, tell them to give more. We'd all love for the people to give more. That's not what that's saying. It's just allowing you to enter easier. I also have the option to enter a memo. Now, what should go in the memo? Well, what do you want to go in the memo? It's really meant as a way to track things. So if they're saying in memory of or building fund for the purpose of, it's a place for you to say something about that specific gift to that specific fund. Now we'll look at where that shows up later on with contribution statements and the like. But for right now, just consider a note that shows up on the batch. Lastly, I hit enter. Enter saves that offering. And you'll notice my little save box appears and I quickly jump down to the next line. I can enter another offering here. I also see that my total of the two gifts shows on the far right-hand side. And when I hover over that, the color changes. You may not be able to see that too well. It's a pretty light color. But I also now can go over here and click the delete button, and it gives you that confirmation to delete. So if you made a mistake and you want to delete that line, you can delete it. Or if you made a mistake and you want to change it, all you have to do is click on that line and it'll give you the option to change things. All right, now I'm back into the entry. So I don't know, that took me like 5 or 10 minutes to enter one line. Don't worry, it's not going to take you that long to enter every line. The speed of entry is dependent upon your processes and what information you know. It won't always go quickly, but we've tried to make it as easy as possible. In fact, you can enter offerings with only your 10 key on your keyboard if you have these other things in place. So, for example, offering envelope number shows up in here. Dave and Sue Abbott are 101. If I type in 101, it's going to go to Dave and Sue Abbott, and I can click enter. Clicking enter takes me to the payment type. They gave a check. I'm going to click enter. Now I enter the check number, 1234. Click enter. Now I enter the fund. General fund, enter. Oh, and this is where it starts to go to this is where you have to be careful because it's going to 1.3 now. But I can go to general fund, enter. It's going to 1.3 because I just used it. It's trying to keep it as smart as possible. Now I go into 20, I type in the amount, $25, enter, and I move to the next line. So let me try that again. I'll do it with my left hand up here, my right hand over here. 102 for Sally Baxter. She gave cash. 1, enter. It was for the general fund. Enter. It was $5. Enter. Move on to the next one. You see that kind of efficiency? The reason we designed it this way is that if you have offering envelopes, what we recommend doing, you stack them together, put them on your left-hand side if you're left or if you're right-handed. Otherwise, you can switch it up. But you pick up your offering envelope and you have it in hand to see exactly what it is. So it's the amount and the fund, and you can fly through it. Now that might take some pre-work. I know at our church, the first step in doing the deposit is you take all of the money out, cash and checks, but you write the amount on the envelope along with the funds, which are typically already written out. Some people may do that for you, but then all you're left with is a stack of empty offering envelopes. They don't usually say the name on it, and so you have a number and amount, which means that you could allow your volunteer to take that home with them and enter it from home. With Church360 members, they can access it online. And so you don't have to have them in there. You don't want them to take the cash and checks home. At my church, we pull it all out, we put it in the safe right away, and then later on it's taken to the bank. But they are dealing with the offering envelopes. And you're gonna have the loose cash and you could enter that first. But you can do it really quickly just by using the 10 key. Of course, you have to have envelope numbers in there, and you need to have fund numbers. And fund numbers are really easy to set up. Offering envelope numbers are a little bit harder. That's it. So I'm curious what questions we have. Oh, and I was going to come back to gifts in kind. So give me just a second and I'll do that. Margaret, I already answered your question about searching for envelope number versus name. You just type in the number. Thankfully, most people don't have numbers in their names. And so you have that distinction between letters being names and envelope and numbers being envelopes. Dun, dun, dun. Yesterday, you mentioned something yesterday, removing extraneous entries of some kind because they would affect Church360 customer billing. What was that? William asked that. That is actually not related to offerings. It's related to people. So I asked that in a bit. But I want to get into Kay's question. And it says, would a gift of an investment stock be gift in kind? Thanks for bringing that up because that drove me back to gifts in kind and the complexities that come with that. Legally, there are a number of different issues with that because how you count the dollar amount is really based on who is counting on that. And it's kind of fuzzy. We are not necessarily the legal experts by any means. And we did some digging. We talked with our internal legal team and our accountants. And what we ended up deciding was that we can't necessarily lock down what you do with gifts in kind because it'll vary. So for example, stocks, those have a designated amount. You can pick an amount for that. And so you might want to enter that and say, let's go down here. Howard Brown gave a gift in kind of $1,000 of stocks of Zoom. Zoom is really popular right now. You could do something like that. Well, you know what it is. It's stock of Zoom. You know the amount, it's $1,000. Well, you can do that. What if instead of stocks, he gave corn? He's a farmer. He gave $1,000 of corn. Well, who is judging whether it was $1,000? Maybe he gave you 3 stalks of corn, and he's saying, well, these are really good. I get credit for $1,000. Well, no, that's not the way to do it. And then what does credit even mean? Is it being applied to the pledge? Is it for tax purposes? And with the tax laws changing recently, that becomes less valuable. It's so subjective. And then he may also say, well, I want this corn to be applied to the building fund. How can you apply corn to the building fund? So you don't necessarily need that fund. So it makes it difficult for us as software developers to tell you exactly how you should use it, because that's the part that's subjective. But we can tell you how you can use it. You can choose a fund and you can choose an amount, and you can choose a memo. Or you can say no fund. I'm just giving $1,000 of corn and enter it in there. You'll see the $1,000 comes under in kind. You could also just say, we'll put Howard in there again, Howard Brown, gift in kind, general fund, $1,000 stock of Zoom. You can put it in that way as well. So you get the choice of whether to have it be applied to a fund or not, and whether or not to have it be an amount or not. So if we wanted to say maybe the corn was actually 0, we just want to list that he gave corn. That's all it was. You can do that too. You have lots of flexibility. Now, if you're going into something, let's go down here, they're giving cash, you'll notice that you have to select a fund for cash. You have to select a fund for checks and electronic. The only type of offering that you can give with no fund is gift in kind, because it doesn't always make sense to have that applied to a fund. Does that make sense to you? Though that it's very flexible, and sometimes flexibility makes it harder to understand, because for most of the questions, the answer is yes, yes, you can do that. Yes, you can do that. So Deb is asking, when you do offerings, your gift in kinds will make the totals different from your deposits. So that would throw things off. Yes, yes, it would. But we identify that here in your totals. So you can see the cash and the check and the electronic. Now, in kind does increase your actual totals. So if you don't want the total to change here, maybe this is what you use to write your deposit slip. Probably is. You could look at it just from cash and check. Now, electronic is going to do that same thing. You're never going to have a deposit of cash, check, and electronic. Electronic will be different deposits, just like gift and kinds won't go on the deposit. So we give you the numbers and you can use them in the way that you want. And if you really want this total to be split out for the deposit, then what you can do is put those on a different batch for the same date. Again, it's flexible to go by how you want to do it. If we said, well, you have to put cash and check in one batch and electronic in another batch and in-kind in another batch, well, that's going to be too restrictive. You may not want to do that. And so our goal is to provide you with the tools, those building blocks, to do what you need to do. So there's a lot of options, which can be a little bit confusing, because a lot of times people just want to know what they should do. All right, next we're going to go, let's see, what other questions do we have? We've got quite a few coming in. So I think what I'm going to do is keep going, and then I'll come back to those questions during the Q&A time. And if Tim gets a chance to answer them before I get there, excellent. So the next thing I want to do is talk about electronic offerings. And I'm not going to spend too much time because you may not be using Vanko. And also, like I mentioned in the introduction, I'm using the staging environment, and we're having a few issues with staging. The production environment, I double checked it today, checked with my church, everything's moving just fine. So it's truly just on the staging side of things. What's happening is that not all my historical transactions are showing up, but recent ones are, so I can show you enough. What I'm going to do first is point you to where you'd go to set this up, and that is in the settings cog in the top right corner, down under Vanko integration, second from the bottom, if you're an admin. When I click on Vanko integration, I get this view here. This goes back to that entry at the top. Remember I talked about that before? In this case, you're entering things in. You're entering in the start date. And well, let me take a step farther back. This word integration. What does an integration mean? What are we trying to do here? That would be better than just showing it to you. What we're trying to do is connect your Church360 Members account with your Vanko Payment Solutions account, an electronic giving service where people contribute to your church through a web interface or through a mobile app or through a variety of different tools. They are contributing electronically. If you're not familiar with Vanko Payment Solutions, they are our preferred e-giving partner. We've worked with them for years. They go by a number of different names with their products. You might be familiar with Thrivent's Simply Giving. That is a Vanko product. You might be familiar with LCEF, Lutheran Church Extensions Fund's Joyful Response. That is a Vanko product. You might be familiar with Give Plus. That is a Vanko product. All of those work with us. And they were really the leaders in the industry from the very beginning, and they are still the leaders in the industry. But they started off working primarily with Lutheran churches. They're based out of Minneapolis, and I think that's where they first started getting Lutheran churches. There's a lot of Lutheran churches up there. Their partnership with Thrivent, which used to be AAL and Lutheran Brotherhood, that really got them off and going. And so they are a fantastic organization. They work with churches of all denominations and have really been just strong partners with us for, I forget how many years now. And so that's why we work with them exclusively for integrations. If you use a different electronic giving software, you can still enter them in by hand. It's not that difficult. You're not having to compile all of the cash and make the deposit, so it's still more efficient. But what Vanko does is they connect their database to our database through what's called APIs. It feeds the data across, and anytime somebody gives electronically, it creates that batch in Church360 Members. That's what we're trying to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shift over into my staging database. I'll zoom in a little bit, and then I'm going to go back to the Vanko integration. There we are on the screen. You'll notice I've already set this up. The first thing I did is enter the date. I put in October 1st. The way that you should think about it is, when was the last time you entered these gifts in? If you've never done it, well, then that's great. You can just start from today. But if you've entered these in manually, you don't want to duplicate it. It's going to start pulling them in based on that date. Then you enter in your client ID, your user ID, and your password. These are not your Church360 members credentials. These are actually Vanko credentials that you get specifically for Church360 members. Well, how do you get that? Well, that's actually pretty easy. You're going to reach out to Vanko if you are an existing customer at either their email address, cs@vankopayments.com, or 800-675-7430, option 1, whatever you prefer. They're going to send you an electronic form to fill out. You submit it. They'll send you the credentials after that. I did this process for my church. It went very smoothly. So anyone can do it, because it's just a matter of reaching out, filling out a form, and being done. But they need to set this up, and because it's dealing with offerings, there's so much security on there. They want to make sure they're getting the right person for the right church, and that person has the authority to. If you are not a Vanko customer and you'd like to add e-giving for your church, there's the link to go to, vankopayments.com/egiving/CTS. That's our partner page, and that'll allow you to get started with that 360 members integration. So that's how you get your credentials. Once you get your credentials, you enter them in here and you make it active. And then you click add, and it adds it to this line here. When you click on that, you'll notice that there's a sync now button. That's what you do that first time to bring in any previous transactions. But after that, it'll sync automatically. Every day it's going to go out and look for new ones, any new gifts, and move them into your account. This is what it'll look like. If I go back to offerings and I select that, they'll start coming in looking like this. Now in this case, it's all caps. And I probably should have shown you, you saw it before, the gifts that we put on our batch before. Let's do that real quick just so you can see it. See that right there? If I go back to offerings, this is going to show up at the top. There's those gifts. So it's that same kind of thing. I'm going to switch back over to staging. I just wanted to show you that. I didn't show that to you. I exited on my batch before, but it's that same kind of view here. The difference is that for any electronic gifts that come over, they need to be associated with people in Church360 members and funds in Church360 members before they are official. But we display them even when they're unofficial, because you need to see your totals at any given time. And so givers come across in all caps, and funds come across if they're linked, but if they're not linked, there's a dash. What these are is these are unlinked givers and unlinked funds. And so I'll get a notification, or unmatched, pardon me, I should use that phrase. you have 3 new unmatched gift funds and 12 new unmatched givers. This is the problem with today, is it says I have 12, but I only have 3 because only the offerings for this week are showing up. Again, that's an issue on staging. Let's go to funds first. We have Gibson, Krause, and Belton. If I go and match, it's going to take me to this matching screen where I'll see the Vanko information on the left and the Church360 information on the right. There's the 12 unmatched givers. If I go, here's Belton, I'll click on Belton, and then I'll select or search for Belton. There's Troy and Kira Belton. So this is the information on the left-hand side from Vanko, and the link here will connect them to the Church360 giver. And you may say, well, why does it not do that automatically? Well, I can tell you from personal experience, this is when people, when they're entering a gift, this is when they put in their formal name, their given name. But in Church360 members, you might have their preferred name. You may not even know their given name. And so we can't do it automatically without potentially accidentally attributing it to the wrong person. So that's why you have to select it manually. But I'll go ahead and click link, and it'll disappear. Didn't actually disappear. It goes down to the bottom here. See, Troy Belton, Troy and Kira Belton. Now when I go back to offerings and I select my range, Troy and Kira Belton show up and in proper casing because they are now matched. Now let's see here. We've got a couple funds that have not been matched. This one says social concerns. This one's music ministry. If I go back here to new unmatched funds, and by the way, I'm going up to notifications. It'll tell you when you have unmatched funds or givers. I could also go to Vanko integration, go to synced funds, and enter it in here. Well, there's the men's ministry. I don't have a fund for that. There's the music ministry. I do, music fund, link. There's social concerns. Let's see, my monitor just flashed on me. No, we don't have social concerns, so I'll have to go create those first. So I'm just gonna link the one. When I go back to offerings, now that line is showing up. See, there's the music fund. I don't have that dash anymore. So that's how you set up the link between electronic offerings from Vanko and Church360 members. Now, anyone that's linked will automatically be applied to their account. I can go straight to their contribution statement and see it. It's a pretty simple process. I know not all of you are Vanko customers, so I'm not going to continue to harp on it, but I wanted to show you that option is available. It's such a time saver because once you link those, you never have to enter those offerings again. It'll just come in automatically. And as more and more people move to electronic offerings, especially now during the coronavirus, you're going to save yourself and your office staff and your volunteers time because it's fewer and fewer offerings that have to be entered, but you're still tracking them. All right, let me take a look and see if there's any questions. The first time you sync, would you need to link every person and fund? Kay is asking that, and that is correct. You would have to sync every one the first time you sync. And then Christine is saying, what if you have a giver who is not a member? That happens from time to time. It's a wonderful thing. What you'll do is you'll get their information here. Go to unmatched givers. You will get their name and address that they entered into Vanko. So you can take this information and go and create a new person and then link them. That doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And so you have enough information there to go and link them. If you want more information, you can log into your Vanko account. They may have entered their email address or their phone number. You can find that information there. But that's what you would do is you'd go and create them. Finally, through Vanko, can you change the fund? Might have been general mission, but needed to be mission to Mexico. Well, that could go a couple different ways. You could change the fund and how it's linked in your, here we'll go to matched funds, but you can also go into Vanko and change the name on it too. So you've got options on both ends. You don't have to sync to the same exact fund. That is your choice. The other thing I should mention is maybe you are taking payments through Vanko. So you're paying for your airline tickets. Well, you could actually ignore that and say, don't bring that in. I'm just going to ignore those and you never see it. So all you'd have to do is click this little red button, hover over the right side, click the red button and click ignore. That's telling the system, these are payments, not gifts. I don't even want to have them show up under offerings. I don't even want to ignore them as a fund. I just want to ignore them before they even get into the system. So you got these different layers of ignore. Very good. I'm going to move back. Yeah, Karen saying, how do you go directly to Vanko to make that change? That's beyond the scope for today. I'm not going to log into Vanko and show that to you. I do have some recorded webinars that show you that though. And so you can look in our resource center. Shifting gears back here to Church360 Members, I'm on the offerings view. We've got about 10 minutes left, which is perfect timing. The offerings view, I mentioned before, you have these summaries. If you click on offerings, you can go to summaries by fund, and it shows you all the offerings, but now it is divided by funds instead of the individual gifts. And you can still change your date range and everything else. What you can also do is add more filters. We talked about the smart group filters, but you can actually filter by fund. Say building fund, and you can just see that total. Why would you want to see just one total? Well, you might want to switch it over to givers and say who has given to the building fund. Right there. These are only the gifts to the building fund. You could also shift it to just people. There's Quinn and Nicole Barnes. Now I've filtered by what they have given to the building fund. You see, there's my beacon, tell me that that's a filter. Now I can switch it back and say summaries by fund, and it's still filtered by Quinn and Nicole, and it's still filtered by building fund. I could take off the building fund filters and see what else they've given to. I could even now go into offerings and only show the funds, or only show the offerings from Quinn and Nicole. In fact, on this view where you have offerings, you have all of your filters available for you. You have your giving or giver filters. You have your fund filters. You just click on a fund there. You also have a type filter. So if you want to see all your electronic offerings, you click electronic and it'll filter them by that. If you'll notice here, your chart changes. And so it becomes a quick summary. So you can say, well, how many people gave to the general fund electronically last week? You can see right there, that is that fund or that total. And then you may get asked the question, well, what's a typical week like? Well, what's the average week? You can go over here to summaries by fund and say, okay, the average gift to the general fund is $112. That's what typically is given. And then the average for that range, well, actually I can't get you the average for that range, but you can start to see that then and to kind of hover over that. You could also export some of this data out and do it in Excel. But you've got a number of different options. Again, the tools are all there. How you want to use them is up to you, but you have a lot of available tools to you for filtering down. Now, we talked about smart groups a lot yesterday. Let me go ahead and close out of these filters and go back into offerings. The smart groups can be used anywhere. You can use your existing smart groups, you see right there. But because we also put in that drawer, that smart group drawer that pops open, this hamburger menu, do you see it shows there? That can allow you to create new smart groups or temporary smart groups, even here on the offerings view. If I want to see people who are living in members now who are age is less than 40, what do the younger people in our congregation do? Well, you can see them right here. These are just people under 40. You can still go in and see their summaries by fund. This is what people under 40 contributed to. Oh, and I forgot to mention, on these views, the summaries by fund and summaries by givers, you can actually change the sort order by clicking on the headers. So who gives the most average, or what fund receives the largest average gift? Well, the general fund. Amount in the date range, the general fund. So you can use these filters in a variety of different ways. But you also have offering filters. So if you type in contributed to, now you can say filters related to people, anyone who have or have not contributed to funds. So we can say general fund, or it'll start with any fund. I can clear it out and type in general fund. Anyone who is under 40 who has contributed to the general fund in the last 3 months, any amount or more than $50 electronically. Look at all of those criteria. I mean, there's a lot of different things there. Living members under 40 who have contributed to a general fund in the last 3 months, and they've contributed more than $50, and they've done so electronically. That's really, really granular. But you can get that list, and then you can say, well, let's show the people. Who are those people? These are those people. Now, we've got a lot for the general fund. Let's go down and we'll say building fund. There's far fewer people who have given that much in the last 3 months electronically to the building fund. In fact, there's only 6 couples there. Well, I'm going to close this up. It still says custom smart group because I haven't saved it. If I want to save it, I can click save group. And we can say young members, oops, we'll type it in. Young members who contributed to the building fund, spell contributed right, and we'll spell building right. Building fund electronically in the last 3 months. That's a mouthful. Don't worry, you don't have a limit on characters there. Or at least if you do, it's really long. Very long smart group name. We'll close up that smart group, and then you can see here you also have the ability to change columns. So if you wanted to see their address or their envelope number, maybe you don't use pledges. We're going to talk about pledges tomorrow. Pledge, after, ahead, behind, percent of goal. We don't need any of those. We don't worry about next envelope number. We don't need to worry about giver type. We've got a few things there. Pardon me, my watch was tapping on the table. I got to stop doing that. There you go. So you have so many different options, and we're all on the same screen. Remember, this is where we started. We went and added a new batch. That new batch button is still up in the top left. All right, I think that is everything on my list. I know we've got questions ahead. Before I get to questions, I'm going to switch over to my PowerPoint. There's again that link for e-giving if you'd like to add e-giving. I want to point you to our training resources. While we didn't cover as much today as we covered other days, there's some pretty granular stuff we went over. So if you need some help, remember we have a training manual available for purchase or the link to the other training webinars. We also have product update blogs where sometimes we'll cover these details, we'll go into new features. And then we also have the resource center where we have all of our different videos available. But you also can get very specific help from our software support team. And Tim's been on the line answering questions. It's wonderful to have him be able to answer those while I'm presenting so that you get the answers sooner than waiting for me. But we have our online help center, which as a quick refresher is down in this lower I button, lower right corner I. You also have the ability to send us a message or call us. You see this send us a message, it puts an email form together or gives you the phone number right there. Those are the next 2 things on my slide. So you've got a lot of options for getting help. Do not worry about getting the answer you need. You have so many different ways to get it, but do not hesitate to reach out to us either. No need to sit and wait for an answer, try to figure out yourself when you can save time by just asking us. But your best option is to ask right now. While I have time, while I'm live, you've got my attention. So we're going to go into question and answers. A few reminders. Type your questions in the GoToWebinar chat. We will be sending a recording, so you don't have to ask about that. That's still our #1 asked question. So don't worry, we will be emailing you a recording. I say within 48 hours. I've been getting it the same day this week, so you'll probably get it later on today. And then if you are watching the recording, maybe you're not attending live and we've gotten to this question and answer section and you say, oh shoot, I really wish I could ask this question. Well, you can still ask it, it just won't be live. So you can ask it to support@cts.cph.org. All right, I'm going to take a drink. I'm going to start looking at my questions. If Tim has answered it, I may not answer it right now. So go ahead and look at your chat, see what things have already been answered. All righty. So I'm going to start by looking at the ones that haven't been answered. Do deactivated funds show up on reports? For example, building fund completed last year. It depends on what you mean by reports. And again, we're going to be getting into that. But I can tell you for the purposes of today, when you deactivate a fund, let's go up here to settings, funds. Let's say we deactivate mission trip airline fees. We're gonna, actually that one has, let's say we deactivate church at large. Click deactivate. I click the little button and deactivate it. When I go to offerings and I go to new batch, just add one for today. Deactivating will take it out of this list here. Now, if there are offerings given to it, it's still going to show up under your different reports related to here. Let's go ahead and clear out my filters. Offerings, we'll do a wide time range, make sure. I'm going to switch it to by fund. Church at large is still showing up there. The reason is, even though the fund is deactivated, there's still offerings given the criteria, which in this case is members and date range. So you don't want to hide it from there. But we don't have the airline fees because nobody gave to it. We do have summer mission trip to Mexico, but if I go down a smaller amount, we're not going to have that. So these views here will only show you funds that have received gifts, but it will show them to you whether they are active or not. So that, I think that answers your question within the context of today. Now there's going to be other reports that we look at later on, and that same philosophy will still apply, but it's obviously going to show differently. So we don't want to hide anything that is appropriate to show there, even if the fund is no longer active. If there's gifts, we're going to show them. Let's keep going. Tim, you've done a great job of answering questions. I missed the part where you can put 2 funds for 1 person. Could you explain that again? Barbara, that is a key part of the software, so I don't want to leave you hanging. Let's go back to new batch. We'll create a new one. I'm going to enter in a person, Dave and Sue Abbott. We're going to say it's cash, and they gave $50 to the general fund and $25 to the building. Well, I'll type in my $50 for the general fund. As soon as I type an amount in there, I get the second line underneath it. And it'll take me to the next fund, because you're not going to put general fund on there twice. When I click on the drop down, it goes to general or building fund, which is next, and then I can just click $25, and it's going to add another line. You see, it always gives me the next line, and if I have 0 lines in there, I just have that one. As soon as I type in an amount, I get a second, and then a third, and a fourth. It'll just keep going. So that's how you do it, Barbara. Mary's asking, can you discuss qualified charitable donation from retirement accounts? Mary, I cannot. I'm sorry. I don't know enough about that to speak intelligently on it, and I don't want to lead you astray. So I would suggest talking with an accountant who can describe that better. I just don't know enough about it, and I don't want to give you the wrong answer. We'll keep going down. Benjamin, you've got a longer question. Give me a second to digest this. You say, when we enter a batch, we print out the full summary and send it with the checks and cash for the bank to have in case there's a discrepancy. If my church starts using e-giving, would this still be possible? It seems to me if the Church360 batch summary has electronic amounts, then obviously the total will differ from the amount we bring to the bank. That is a very good question, Ben, and it actually will still work, because if you integrate your electronic offerings, those are going to become a new batch. It may be for the same day, but it will not be applied to any existing batches. So if you're only entering offerings by cash and check in a batch, then you'll never have anything added to that batch. We don't want to kind of corrupt the batch by putting in things you weren't expecting. So you'll see here, if I hover over this, and it might be it's light on the view, but I can see it pretty well. As I hover over, these are the different batches that we have. and a new batch will be added for electronic offerings that are synced in. The only time you'll see electronic offerings with cash and checks is if somebody manually enters it that way. So you'll still be able to do what you've been doing before. Electronic will just be new batches, even if they're on the same days. So very good question. I'm glad you asked that. Joanne, you've got a longer question as well. I have several members who are giving their qualified charitable contributions. I tell our financial secretary to not record on the giving statement. I write a letter of receipt to the donor acknowledging the gift and to use this letter for tax purposes. Is this the most efficient way to handle this kind of transaction? Let's see who gives qualified charitable contributions. I would suggest, that certainly works. I don't know if it's the most efficient way, but it's certainly the most personal, and you may still want to do that just because of that personal aspect of it. You can add those in, and I believe those, you're saying those are, when you say qualified charitable contributions, I'm assuming you're meaning qualified gift and kind charitable donations, not just any one. If you're writing a letter for every single gift, that's not very efficient. But so I'm assuming you're saying gifts in kind. And if you do answer that, it'll be on my bottom of my list, so I won't be able to see it right now. But it's up to you if you want to continue to. That still works. I would recommend if there's a specific amount that you would still put that under gifts in kind so that your total gifts can be summarized and easily reported, as opposed to having different buckets. So if there's an amount included in that, which it sure sounds like there is, then I would still enter those into members, but you could choose to not show them on the contribution statement, or you could choose to include them on the contribution statement and still send them a thank you note so that you have that exact thing. So whether it's most efficient or not, it's kind of subjective. It's up to you, but it definitely isn't wrong. And you have more options. All right, is there a way to see totals by fund by type? Jane is asking that. Well, you have the option to say summaries by fund, but you aren't going to have a type here. What you could do, and this is not going to be really easy, but as we get into reports, you can find a way. If you want to say like cash, you filter it by cash on the offerings view. Then you move in and switch it to summaries by fund. These are only the funds that have received cash. So you could do that for each one. When we get into it on Tuesday, I'll show you how to save these reports. And so you don't have to recreate it each time, but you'll have a cash report, electronic report, a check report, a gifts in kind report. It's a little tedious, but that's really the only way to do that outside of a batch. Let's keep going down. Julia is asking, what is a quick, easy way when keying in offerings to get a different Sunday? For instance, vacation people put multiple weeks in the plate on a given Sunday. Ooh, there is not an easy way to do that. I would say that you, if they put multiple weeks on a given, or like in the plate, I don't know if you need to split those up by week, because your deposits are always already entered. So I'm gonna kind of make some assumptions here. Let's say that a family went on vacation for 2 weeks. The third week they come in, they give you 3 checks. They put it in the envelope at the same time. Did they really give those checks each of the 3 weeks, or did they give you 3 checks on that same week? You might want to just enter them all in on that week, because it's going to go into that deposit. If they want to see it different weeks on the contribution statement, well, then you're going to have to go and create a new batch for each of those. And there's not a quick and easy way, but you can do it just by going create new batch, enter that offering, then back up, create another new batch, enter that offering. It's not quick and easy. And I would say that that is kind of bending over backwards if they prefer to have it that way. There's no reason financially why you can't just summarize those 3 in one batch, because they're going to be deposited at the same time. So that's kind of an iffy situation. My recommendation would be that in those situations, you put them all in the same batch, and they'll show up that way on a contribution statement, but that's okay. That's how they gave it, even though it fulfills those different weeks. Now, as we get into pledges, that adds more complexity. We'll talk about that tomorrow. I'm going to keep going down. We're at 11:25. We're in good shape time-wise. I think I missed it. Joanne's asking this, but how do I isolate one giver to look up their offerings during a time period without downloading their contribution statement? Well, Joan, I showed you that, but I didn't show you the easiest way to do that. I really should have. So let's back up a second. I'm going to go over to people. I'm glad you brought up that question. I should have shown this before. Let's go to Nikki Barnes. We were using her quite a bit yesterday. We used Quinn the day before, but we'll go to Nikki. Here's her profile. If you go down to the very bottom of her profile, there's an offerings button. Click on offerings. We'll show that. I also realized something else I didn't do. I didn't show the roles. I bet you there's a question coming up on that. I'm going to show that next. If I go here, it automatically applies Quinn and Nicole Barnes as the giver. So when I see this listing, I can see that Quinn and Nicole have given that much. It puts it, not just Nicole, because she gives jointly, but it automatically puts that filter in place. I can remove the filter. I can still go to summaries by giver and see all the different people. I can sort it by name and go and click on Quinn and Nicole, and it takes me right back to that view. So that's how that works. All right, I apologize. I wanted to show the roles. I was excited about showing it, and I didn't do that. But that's okay. I've got it set up pretty easily. Let me go over here to settings and roles. I'm going to create a new role that's called offering entry. Just create it, add it. Now we'll get in there. So the first thing, let me uncheck that box. Let's say you have a volunteer and the only thing they can do is enter offerings, and you don't want them to see who gives what. That's why you have offering envelope numbers. So you have somebody who confidentially takes the cash out, takes the check out, puts the dollar amount on the offering envelope, hands the offering envelopes to somebody. So all they're getting is numbers. Offering envelope 134 gave $50. That's pretty confidential until you go into here. If they see that offering envelope 134 is tied to the Smiths, well, now they know how much the Smiths gave. But if all they can do is enter offerings, they can't review it, and they can't see individual contributors' details, what does that look like from an entry standpoint? Well, I'm going to go ahead and save that. That's my offering entry role. All they can do, the only thing they can do is enter offerings. Now I'm going to go under settings and go to logins. And when I go down here, I have a new person that I've added. I added her beforehand. Her name is Anita Gomez, and I put her under volunteer, but I'm going to take that out because I wanted to create that new role in front of you. I'm going to just put her under offering entry and hit save. Give it a second to refresh. There it is. Anita is only able to enter offerings. So I'm going to log out. I'm signed in as the administrator. I'll log out. I'm going to sign in as Anita. I've saved the credentials. Give it a second to log back in. It goes straight to Anita's profile because that's where she can log in. You'll notice it doesn't go to people because she doesn't have access to people. In fact, if you look here, she's got access to her profile and her user settings. She can see some notifications, but only the ones that are relevant, which aren't many for her. And then she's got offerings. If I go to offerings, you can see that she doesn't have all of the reporting things. I can summarize the offerings, but look at when you select those dates, the names in the envelopes are hidden. She doesn't know who gave what. If she clicks on a batch to go review it, she still doesn't know who gave what. Let me go ahead and click back. Let's go and enter offerings. How does she enter offerings if she can't see things? Well, we'll click new batch. She's entering offerings for Sunday. We'll click add. Here we go. Let's see. Oh, there's no names there. Well, there actually are names because you might get a check without an envelope. Well, let's say Quinn and Nikki Barnes gave a check, and they just put the check in the plate because they're brand new, they don't have offering envelopes. If you type in Barnes, you can still see Quinn and Nikki Barnes, but otherwise you can't connect envelope numbers to people. And you'll notice if we go down, there's all of those envelope numbers. None of the people have envelope numbers associated with it. Now, if you remember before, Dave and Suzanne Abbott were 101. I can type in 101, but I'll never know that it's Dave and Suzanne Abbott. Let's say they don't use their envelope number. I can still type in Dave and Suzanne Abbott so that I can enter that amount. But that would only be if they gave a check. If you keep it confidential on the envelope side, the people who enter it are never going to see it. So they type in 101. This was cash, general fund, $50. Now we'll type in Barnes. They gave a check. That's how I know it was them. It was check 4566, general fund, $100, enter. You keep going, but you can never tie those two things together, that offering envelope and the giver. So now there's my batch, it's auto saved. If I go back to offerings, I can see the givers, 101, Quinn and Nicole Barnes. Why can I see those now? I can't see the other ones. Well, it's because Anita, who I'm signed in as, is the one who entered that. And so if she needs to go fix something, we don't want to hide what she entered. She already entered it. She knows what it is, but it still doesn't tell us too much. Yes, we know Quinn and Nicole Barnes contributed $100, but Anita knows that because she saw the check when she entered it. And it could just be that somebody else, looked up the check, found the envelope number, put it on there. Well, that's a lot of work and probably not worth it. It's okay for her to know that one time because she's working with the checks. But that's how that works. Somebody else who goes in with the same permissions as Anita will not see the names here because they did not enter it. So Anita can always see what she entered, but she's not going to be able to summarize it. She's not going to be able to look up anything else other than what she put in. So there's that security that I mentioned at the beginning, kind of forgot about, but still remembered before the end of the webinar. So I'm glad you got to see that. All right, we're just past time, but we got a few more questions in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign out under Anita. And then I'm going to go ahead and log in as myself. And the next question is actually related to roles, but a different way. So Catherine is saying, can't the administrator still enter and review offerings since the administrator role cannot be edited? Yes, that is true. And that's why it's important to pick the right administrator for this. Now, what I would recommend, if you are worried about who should be the administrator, what you can do is you could create an email address, or maybe you already have one, that is more of a generic email address that you can set up as the administrator. And that way, that login is being used by one person, or you could share the credentials with two trusted people who never need to go in here and do it. Or you could put it in a safe and tell somebody, hey, this is where the credentials are, but we're not going to use it unless we need to, and then create separate roles for everybody else so that only the people who need it are able to see it. But that's the challenge with having roles. You don't want to have a role. You don't want to permission yourself out of access. If you remove the administrator role and all of a sudden you have nobody who's the administrator, then you're kind of stuck. And I'll be honest, years ago, we had that problem with the software and we had to make some changes because we got people who got stuck and then they couldn't do the things they needed because nobody had an administrator for security purposes. So Catherine, you're absolutely right. The administrator can review that. And that's why it's so important to pick the right users for that administrator level. All right, is there a way to separate who gives to different things, but still goes into the general fund, such as altar flowers? Yes, there is. It's not necessarily the most intuitive. And I apologize, I'm getting some GoToWebinar delays. So if you are having delays, my apologies. There's not much I can do. I usually have to just wait it out. But in the past when I've done this, people are still able to see me. So I'm going to keep going. If I click new batch, I'll add a new batch in here. Let's say Dave and Suzanne Abbott gave a check, 1, 2, 3, 4, to the general fund, $100. That one was for operating expenses, but then they said, also, I want to give $50 to Altar Flowers. And you at the church say, well, that's general fund. Well, you can go in here and switch it to general fund. You can actually have general fund on 2 lines on the same transaction or same entry going to different memos. Memos are nothing but notes, but they still separate. And there you go. So that's how I'd recommend doing that. Let's keep going down. We got a few more minutes before, oh boy, a lot of questions later on. Well, we'll keep getting into it. All right, Cindy's saying, when entering a batch, I have a giver that I have entered for several times before now shows up as an error because he has an error button. The actual offering amount does not record in the total. There's nothing different about his name, number, or name, or envelope number or name. Yeah, Tim just responded to that. Has this person been archived? Potentially. That's a question for support. I'm not sure what's going on there. That is, if anytime you have an error, that's an exception. That's not something that's supposed to happen. And so we got to look into that. But once we fix the error for you, we can have it fixed for everybody. How can you compare April 2020 to April 2019 for the general fund? That'll be a question for next week on Tuesday when we get into reports. That was from Karen. Joanne, circling back to the question before, qualified charitable donation is a check I received to go to a specific fund. Well, that's simpler than I thought. If it's a check that you receive, you just go to the name, you put the check amount in there, put check number, and you pick the fund. Maybe it's going to education. Put in $500, education. That's all you do. I would include all of those in Church360 members. When you're not talking about gifts and time, any cash donation should still go in here. Now, if it's a $500 gift, you'll definitely want to send a thank you note. That's for sure. But still enter it in here. And then you can make that decision about the thank you note. How do you want to handle those? Do you want to just include it with your contribution statement? But they really should all be summarized at the end of the year for the giver. Melvia is asking, what if someone gives but are not a member of your church? How would you track for tax purposes of the giver? Well, that depends how much you know about them. If you know their name, enter it in by their name. If you have their address, even better. You can enter it by name and address and mail them a contribution statement. So if they don't give you the name and they don't give you the address and you don't know who it is, that's on them. They want to be anonymous. So you use as much information as they give you, but don't feel bad if you can't get it to them if they don't tell you who they are. Suggestion from William. For the convenience of counters cross-checking, show how clicking the batch date brings up a total display at the bottom. We've talked about that. How do we show the batch totals? I think we're going to do some things differently in the future, but I appreciate that suggestion because you're absolutely right. It does take a little bit to click in the batch and see those totals. Can you get rid of the title pledge for date range without it affecting the total and the giving and date range? Because not everyone turns in their pledge cards. It's kind of deceiving when it looks at our giving is way higher than what has been pledged. Yes, Cindy, you can actually do that. If I go over here to offerings, I have this column view. This column says you can include or exclude pledges. So if you don't want to show that, and it depends on who you're printing this out for, but you can just hide those totals. And pledges can be excluded from contribution statements too. So you have that option of whether you show it or not. And let me just, yeah, here we go, so that you can see some data in there. Couple more questions. I put the date in memo when there are multiple weeks given in the batch. Nora suggested that. That's a great idea, Nora. That goes back to the question before about people on vacation giving multiple weeks. I like that idea because you can still identify given for this week, but you don't have to create a different batch. Good job, I like that. Karen, when I get more than one check in a week, I put it up, there you go. I put a note in the memo that says 3 checks in the same amount of this and this and this. That's awesome. So you guys are way ahead of me. How do you access an older batch? Cindy's asking that. That's a really good question. If I go and let's say I want to access a batch from way back in November, I can go and find my date range. Then I go to offerings. It'll go down to that one. These are the different batches. So you can look at the dates and see like this one's all from November 17th, now November 10th. I can click on that and take me back into that batch. Christine said, can you delete a former secretary who's no longer employed by the church? Yes, Christine, you can. That goes into roles. Let's see, this is an administrator or someone who can center. I think there's a typo there. If you are at a role that allows you to manage users, you can go into logins, find that person, and click the delete. Now, if you are able to manage people, you could set somebody else as a different administrator. The other thing you could do is you could take that permission level. So let's say you only have one administrator. Let's say you are the administrator. You can go here, click on that role, and switch the person. The credentials will be the same still. So that might be an issue. I should clarify that. That's if you have a shared email address and it's associated with one person. But you can go in here and change who the person is, who the credentials are assigned to. That might be a better way of saying that. So you've got a few options there. If you have any questions about that, because that's pretty much a unique situation, you can contact our support team. They'll walk you through the best way to handle that. Cindy says, oh, I guess that's a question related to support. Yeah, that's referring to the archive person. All right. I think I've covered all the ones Tim didn't get, and we are past our time. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for attending today. I really appreciate it. I always go over, even today, with limited things to present. There's just so much richness to Church 360, so many different ways you can use it, so many variables. Again, I can talk about this all day, but I'm not going to do that because it's getting close to lunchtime and I'm getting hungry and I'm sure you are as well. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you for attending. Come back tomorrow where we'll continue on and look at some more details around offerings, specifically related to end of the year functions like statements and pledges and offering envelopes. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.